I love how every time I look out on the water, it's a little bit different. The light is different, the weather has an effect, the waves have an effect. It is always changing. And part of that change is the tides. I'm on Passamaquoddy Bay today between Maine and New Brunswick, Canada. This is an area that has some of the largest tidal ranges in the United States. I want to share with you some of the things and some of the ways that I think about using tide information and pick this really complex tidal environment to share that with you. Now, this is an advanced area. I would not come out here as a beginner paddler. There's a lot of things happening, and there's a lot of things that can catch you off guard if you're not aware. But the skills that I'm going to share are things that you can extract into other calmer paddling environments. Also today, I want to unpack the parallels between the change we see here on the water and the change that's constantly happening in our lives. Nothing stays the same, and we're going to look at that today. All right, friends. Well, let's get out there and have an adventure. I left out at Eastport today, the easternmost city in the United States. My goal is to ride the tide out to Lubec. It's a little closer at the mouth of Passamaquoddy Bay, and Lubec is the easternmost town in the United States. I think there's an interesting rival and distinction between city and town, but Lubec is trying to one-up Eastport in the easternmost label. Today I'm going to share two ways of thinking about tide. One way is thinking about the height of the tide, and the other way is thinking about the speed of the current that's created by the tide moving in and out. They both have their place. There's some correlations between the two, but it's helpful to think of these two in slightly different ways depending on how we need to apply these rules that I'll teach you. While Passamaquoddy Bay has some of the biggest tides in the US, the Bay of Fundy, which this feeds into, has some of the largest tides in the world. Tides can reach 52 feet in the Bay of Fundy. It all has to do with the shape of the bay and water getting funneled in and creating these enormous, enormous tides. Now, for some perspective, that is 70 billion cubic feet of water moves with each tide cycle. Now, that number meant nothing to me, and it probably means nothing to you. So for some context, all of the world's rivers emptying into the ocean in that same period are less water than moves in and out of the Bay of Fundy. Now, that much water creates some pretty intense tidal currents. Here in Passamaquoddy Bay, some of the peak current can reach 5 knots. And some of the areas that we'll paddle today, that'll get close to 3 knots. For some more perspective, we paddle roughly at 3 knots. At certain spots here in the bay, at opposite times of the tide, if I'm going in the opposite direction, the water is going to be moving faster or as fast as I can paddle. I'll basically be paddling on a treadmill. That's cool. There was like fog coming over the rockweed. I've never seen that effect before. And at first I thought it was because the rockweed was cold and it was getting warm air from the ocean. But when I rounded that point, this air is much cooler than it was right on the other side of that point. So the rockweed must be heating up in the sun. And then the cold air blowing over it is enough to recondense water vapor. Science. Well, most of the water right now is trying to leave Passamaquoddy Bay. Along the shoreline, we've got a back eddy. The water's actually going the opposite direction of what you would expect if it's trying to get out to sea. It's not uncommon to find those back eddies close to shore. Now, it's not moving that fast. I can paddle against it. It's not worth me going too far out to get out of it, but if I needed to, I would. As the tide's going out, I'm seeing more and more kelp getting exposed. And kelp is a sign that there's a ton of water moving. Kelp likes a lot of nutrient exchange. And this point gets a lot of new water a couple of times a day. Okay, as I was at a little break there on Eddys Head, I was watching the water just pour out of Cobscook Bay. That created a bit of a tide race, and it was a really clear eddy line that was building up. That's dying down. I was thinking about how I would approach that, but it's dying down. But, you know, briefly how I'd approach it is I'd keep my bow roughly into most of the flow and ferry across. Instead of taking a bulk of that speed and water along the side of my boat, I would, like a needle, pierce through that water and ferry over. So advanced technique, didn't really need to apply it today. I don't really see the need out here as we're getting a little closer to low tide, which I'll tell you what that means here in a little bit for the tide. Okay, let's cross over to Treat Island. Getting another little tide race here coming up towards Treat Island as the water's whipping around the other side of Treat Island. Before I go too far into the first principle that I want to share with you, I just want to go over the tides we have here in Maine, because your area might be different and the things I'm sharing might not track exactly. Here in Maine, we have semi-diurnal tides. That means we have 2 high tides and 2 low tides of essentially the same height. They happen in a 24-hour period. It's 24 hours and 50 minutes. And yeah, we can expect the tide height or the tide depth, if it's going out, to be roughly the same. Okay, so now let's talk about the Rule of Twelfths, the first principle I want to share with you. The Rule of Twelfths states that in the first hour of the tide, and we're going to pretend it's low tide, in the first hour of the tide will rise 1/12 its total height. In the second hour of the tide, it will rise 2/12. In the third hour, it's going to get up to 3/12. In the fourth hour, it's going to add another 3/12 of its total height. In the fifth hour, we've got back down to another 2/12. And then finally, in the last hour of the tide, it will rise another 1/12. Now, how do you use that? Well, one easy way to use it is when you land on a beach, if you're going to be there for a while and you know what time of the tide cycle is, you know how far to get your boat up before the water's gonna get your boat, or going to have to be a thing that you keep dragging your boat up. So you can get a sense of, if you're in the middle of the tide, you can expect it to come up the beach quite a bit. It's also helpful when I'm packing a kayak for a camping trip and say the tide's going out, or coming in for that matter. I know how close I should get my boat, because I know it's going to take me about an hour, maybe 30 minutes to load my boat up and get everything in, and I don't want to have to drag a fully loaded boat further than I need to. The really practical way to use this is when you're planning a trip and looking at your chart and you see the green areas that indicate drying height. Those are areas that at some point in the tide, they're going to dry out. Now, charts don't tell us when they're going to dry out. They just say that in mean low water, this is an area that doesn't have any water. So what that might mean is, if I'm planning a route or a trip, and on one side of the island there's a big green bar underwater that is underwater during high tide, but at some point in the tide I know that's going to get exposed. If I know that I'm paddling on the bottom half of the tide, I can go to the other side of the island and know that I won't have to paddle further out than I need to, or paddle to the bar and then realize I can't get over in my boat and then have to paddle back around the other way. So it's a way to kind of get your head around what's the water going to be like when I get to a certain spot, given the time of tide. Coming up to Treat Island, if I had a little bit more time today, I would get off and explore, but I am a little bit bound by the tide. I want to hit my turnaround point at a certain time of the tide, and not put myself in a situation where I'm fighting the tide more than I need to. This dock here gives you an amazing sense of how much the tide rises as we're at low tide right now. 30 feet out of the water. That's amazing. All right, I'm making some decisions on the route here. My vision was to get to Lubeck, but I wanted to be at Lubeck around 3:30. That's about 20 minutes from now. And if I made a straight line, I'd get there. But that 3:30 time is the time that I'd want to turn around and head back to catch the flood coming back in. And I don't really feel like rushing. I don't have a need. Like, Lubeck's a fine town, but it wouldn't add a whole lot to this story. So I'm going to make Treat Island a turnaround spot. I'm going to take a little bit more time here around Treat Island and actually explore Treat Island, and then get my ride back into Eastport. So we'll have to save Lubeck, the easternmost town in the United States, for another day. I'm in a nice little wind shadow in Treat Island, and I see some steps and a sign for the preserve, which I'm going to get off here in a little bit and check out now that I've got my new plan of not going into Lubeck. But before I do that, I wanted to share the second rule that is really helpful for kayakers, and it's the 50-90 rule. Really quickly, it's that at the end of the first hour, the tide is going to reach 50% of its max speed for that tidal window, that 6 hours. At the end of the second hour, it's going to be at 90%, and at the end of the third hour, it's going to be at 100%. At the end of the fourth hour, it goes back down to 90%. End of the fifth hour, 50%, and then the sixth hour, the last hour of that tidal cycle, will be at 0. There are some ways that it relates a little bit to the Rule of Twelfths, where the middle of the tide, the most is happening, but the Rule of Twelfths doesn't give you any estimation on what to expect speed-wise. It's just height. So clearly there's a correlation, but they're measuring two different things. That head that I saw, Eddys head, that the water was ripping out at 3 knots, right now, or pretty soon actually, it's going to be still. So if I was making my way through this area, if I had to pass through this area and my route put me into that spot, I could plan my trip of hitting that spot at one of its 0% flow times. Now, let's put this into context. The max flow today around Eddys Head was 3 knots. It was like 3.2, 3.1 knots, but let's just use 3 knots. So this tells me at the end of the first hour, it's going to reach 1.5 knots coming around that head. The end of the second hour, let's see, it'd be 2.7 knots, math for you, coming around that head. At the end of the third hour, max flood, it's going to be 3 knots. It's going to be its predicted highest speed. And then it's going to start going down. The next hour will be back down to 2.7 knots, and then the hour after that, 1.5 knots before then, in its 6th hour, getting to 0 knots as it's 0%. So that's the other principle that I use when sea kayaking. That explanation allowed me to drift almost all the way over to Treat Island. So let's go check Treat Island out. Perfect, didn't even scrape my boat. It's like I planned that. Well, who is this genius with the knots on the rope? Bravo, somebody. Pretty little picnic spot. Their information pamphlet door is open. Let's go close that for them. Nope. Hello, Canada. Treat Island was a great stop. As much as I enjoy the town of Lubeck, that was way better to explore that island. The island has a lot going on. There's some old foundations, there's a lot of ruts, there looks like there's a lot of remnants of walls in the area, and that history looks like it goes back to pre-Revolutionary War times. And then in the War of 1812, the British had an encampment there as they had occupied Eastport. So there's been a lot going on that island. I wonder how many people use it now. It's, I don't know, it's not an easy spot to get to. Maybe people with boats in town come out here for the day in the summer, see that, but not many kayakers out in these waters. And it's probably a good thing. Again, these are tricky waters. Hello, periwinkles. And is that a limpet? I don't see many limpets. Hello, limpet. Cool. Nature. Nature's fun. That water is cold. My hand got an ice cream headache. Okay, let's use our 50-90 rule. I'm going to be making my way around Treat Island and coming to the north side. And that's where the channel coming from the ocean through Lubeck Narrows back to Eastport is. So that's where all of the ocean is going to start to try to flood in. But I know we're within the first hour of the tide. So, and we're really close to the switch. So I know we're probably close to that 0%. Maybe we're like 10% of our flow. So as I hit these points, I don't really expect there to be too much movement or too much dynamic water. As I look at the kelp, I see it going in the direction I want to go, which is always a great sign. So we're taking these rules and principles of paddling in tide. It's really about not resisting, and at very least understanding what's happening and what we can expect. And for me, in my life, that extends to when I fight against the change, or when things are happening that I don't want to happen, or when something unexpected comes up, there's that reminder, like, things are going to change. And I can either expect things to stay the same, which they don't, and suffer, or I can understand that things are going to shift and things are going to change and everything's impermanent and everything's moving. And for me, going with the flow, I feel that in my body. I feel it in my emotions and my mood. When I'm frustrated or angry, to me, that's a sign that I'm fighting against the flow, right? I'm fighting against the tide. And when I can recognize that, when I can put down what I want to have happen and just be present to what's actually happening, I can bring a little bit more ease back into my life. Interestingly, because I saw some dynamic water off of a few sides of the Treat Island, the other side of Treat Island, I expected a little bit to see it here, but I don't see anything yet. And I think that's part of the process too. And another tip I'm going to offer is just like make a plan, make some observations about what you expect might happen. And when they don't happen, great. But when they do happen, you're not caught with like, uh-oh, what do I do now? And that's one of the things that 50-90 rule does for me. It allows me to make a plan and be ready for something. All right, let's bop over Friars Road here back to Eastport and see if anything's picking up on the other side around some of these points flooding back into Passamaquoddy Bay. Coming back towards Eastport, and as I was making my way to that buoy, I noticed a darker patch of water. So I moved a little closer to shore because I didn't really want to be offshore. And that water between me and the buoy is really dynamic. I can see on the other side of it, it's not moving as fast, but between me and the buoy, there's some stuff happening. I'm gonna try to tuck into this little cove here, but I think I'm just gonna be fighting the current, so I'll need to make this quick because it's pushing me back the way I don't want to go. Well, we planned that trip back perfectly. And as I look out now, I see it's just increasing. I'm starting to see some whitecaps forming as that tide is pushing against the water here in the bay and starting to stack up. I hope some of the things I shared around planning for tidal environments was helpful. There's something in the Rule of Twelfths or the 50-90 rule that helped you out. If you're an experienced paddler, I'd love to know if you've got other tips that you would like to offer that we can all learn from. If you're a new paddler, I'd love to know what you're going to take out of this episode the next time you find yourself or when you find yourself in a tidal environment. I also hope some of the reflections and observations around going with the flow in life and finding those areas where we're resisting or we're fighting and learning to let go or go with what is in front of us. If you enjoyed this type of thing, I've got other episodes on this channel of me exploring this amazing and beautiful coastline. I've got kayak camping, I've got amazing trips of some of my favorite spots along the coast, and some tips and tricks are sprinkled throughout, so I hope you check those out and tell me what you think there. All right, friends, well, I hope you enjoy your adventures, whatever they are, and until next time, safe paddling. Goodbye, everybody.